But one random nitpick though, am I the only one that thinks it looks like he has a frowning face or something? Look at that. Is he depressed? Bow! What's up guys, this is Pojr coming at you with another video. So I've always been a big fan of some of the Ninja Turtles games that were on Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo. I had Tournament Fighters as well as Turtles in Time. So I've always been a big fan of the Konami style beat 'em ups. So anyway, when I heard that Dotemu was making a new Ninja Turtles beat 'em up game, I was actually pretty excited about it. They did a pretty good job with that Streets of Rage game that they made recently. So this seemed like an interesting topic to talk about. So I want you to let me know in the comments, who is your favorite Ninja Turtle? Mine personally was always Donatello, honestly for a really stupid reason, but my name is Dan, kind of similar. Anyway, let's get right on to it. Since we don't have a lot of gameplay footage to go off of, I thought it would be cool to go over the classic beat-em-up Ninja Turtles games by Konami. When you think of Ninja Turtles games, you might have a few in mind. There's Turtles in Time for the Super Nintendo, that's one of the best on the console. There's also the original arcade version. However, there was one game that was made before that. It's not a beat-em-up, and it's much different from the others. Let's take a look at this one first. So you start off in a hub world where you can enter any door or sewer area. This is pretty much your map. It's a pretty neat idea. When you enter where you want to go, the game actually starts. You can swap between any turtle and they each have their own attributes. They even have their own life bars too, which is nice. You do have to be careful though, because once you lose a turtle, you will not be able to get him back, so it's better to switch to a different turtle to preserve him if he's about to die. Once you lose all 4 of your turtles, the game is over. So with that all out of the way, they did a lot of great things here. For one, the controls are great. You can aim your weapon in multiple directions, not just left or right, but also up and down, and that makes a huge difference in some areas, believe it or not. I also really have to compliment how easy it is to switch between the turtles. Just press start and you can switch right on the fly. There's a million ways they could have messed this up, but they got it right. The hub worlds can be nice too, because you don't necessarily have to enter every door or sewer. You can skip areas if you want. For an NES game, the graphics are great. It's very colorful. I especially like the aesthetics of the caves in the final level. The turtles also look great considering the limited color palette. The music is fantastic as well, take a listen. So there's a lot of good here. It's a fun game with a lot to offer, but there are some problems. For one, the respawning enemies are really not fair. When you re-enter an arena you've already been to, the enemies will all come back. Come on man, that's not fair. But on the plus side, when you re-enter a stage, the pizza will also respawn. So re-entering buildings over and over again is essential for keeping your turtles healthy. The turtles themselves are also unbalanced. For an example, Donatello is extremely overpowered in comparison to the other turtles. It seems stupid that one turtle is really good and the other ones suck. Raphael especially is horrible because he has very poor range. His power output is decent, but what good is it if you can't reach anything? Your best strategy is to keep Donatello healthy, because if you lose him, your team is going to be severely hindered. Your biggest hurdle in this game is the unrivaled difficulty. The whole game is an endurance round because when you beat a stage, none of the turtles' life bars get replenished. That respawning pizza trick is one of the few ways you can restore your turtles' health reliably, but there are not many places you can do that. So a lot of people talk about the water stage and how unforgiving it is. Some parts of this stage, I just don't understand how it's possible to get through without taking damage. Like, look at this, seriously. Now, I can beat the water stage without losing a turtle, that's not the problem. The problem is the endurance part of it. The stage will weaken your entire roster, and when you make it to the next stage, your whole team is going to be almost dead. Look at this, I'm hurting over here. The game gets impossible when you get to the caves. The enemies are just way too powerful, and their AI is extremely difficult to figure out. These sand slash looking dudes take 4 hits to kill with Donatello. So again, when you lose a turtle, he's gone for good. There is a place where you can actually rescue captured turtles, and they will be fully restored, which is nice, but it's usually not worth it because you may lose another turtle trying to rescue one. So like, what am I supposed to do here? I'm on my last turtle and I have a sliver of life left. My weapon isn't long enough to kill everyone on screen, so guess I'm just gonna die. So I like to think I'm decent at games. I've beaten some pretty hard games, but this one I could just never do. I've made it to the Technodrome, but I've never beaten it. But despite it being difficult, it's hard for the right reasons, not because of flawed gameplay or bad controls or anything like that, but because it's a genuine challenge. This game does have some issues, but this is an absolute classic, and it used to commonly show up on top 30 lists in Nintendo Power. Would you believe that Konami held on to the license to Ninja Turtles until 2012, and this game was actually on Virtual Console until then? Pretty interesting. Overall, you really can't go wrong with this game. The arcade Ninja Turtles was released a few months after the NES version, so let's talk about this one next. A beat-em-up style game was a really good fit for the Ninja Turtles franchise. The cartoon was also in its peak of popularity at the time. From a kid's standpoint, this checks a lot of boxes. A lot of the characters from the Ninja Turtles show are here. Even the graphics emulate the cartoon style of the show very well. It's almost like you're playing out an episode of the show. I admire the detail they put into the background too. For an example, in Stage 2, you see April and Shredder on TV. There are also foreground objects you can interact with, like trash cans and fire hydrants, that can help kill off enemies on screen. There's also hazardous objects in the background that can hurt you. For an example, in Stage 4, you're in a parking lot. You assume the cars are just decorations, but you're in for a surprise. A lot of beat-em-ups tend to be repetitive, but at least with this one, the levels have enough variety so you're not going to be bored. Overall, this is a really solid title. The game got a lot of praise when it was first released, taking the #1 spot as the best overall arcade game in the Replay magazines for the first 9 months of the game's release. The first NES game was one of the best-selling games on the console, so it only made sense to bring the arcade experience home, and sure enough, here it is. They ported the arcade version of the game to the NES. The official title is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Arcade Game, making this an official sequel to the other one. It's worth mentioning that the Ninja Turtles had a lot of product placement for pizza. I mean, after all, they liked pizza in the show. In the first Ninja Turtles movie, for an example, they're shown eating Domino's. This particular game actually came with a coupon for a free personal pan pizza from Pizza Hut. That's pretty cool. So you can tell right away, this game did take a big graphical downgrade, but this doesn't surprise me. The arcade game kind of resembles Turtles in Time, which I should remind you is a Super Nintendo game. The original NES has a very limited color palette, it can't handle too many sprites on screen at once, and it only has one background layer to work with. But despite it not looking as great, it still plays very similar to the arcade. Nearly every scene, every stage boss, and every level layout is the same as the arcade. Remember that TV in the background of Stage 2? Surprisingly still there. That hazardous background car in Stage 4? The movement is a lot more choppy, but it's still there. One element that they left in actually surprises me. In the Technodrome level, there's a conveyor belt that you can ride near the end of the stage. Since the arcade version has multiple background layers to work with, I can see how they pulled this effect off. Just have the platform right here to be one of the background layers, and have the stage background be the other one. Simple. But since the NES only has one background layer, how did they pull this off? Well, notice how choppy the movement is. Looks like they resorted to stop motion. In other words, they manually updated the background tiles to give the illusion of moving. For the record, I do think it's really cool that they went this far to keep the game close to the original. However, there are some inevitable changes they had to make. In the parking lot stage, for an example, in the arcade version you fight Bebop and Rocksteady. The NES version is not going to be able to handle two big sprites on screen, so they replaced them with Baxter Stockman in Flyform. The bosses in general took a big downgrade, much smaller sprites and overall less detail, but I can see why. The arcade sprites are huge. The NES couldn't have handled something like this, and NES sprites can only handle up to 3 colors, not counting transparency, so they were limited on color choices. Now, this game is not easy by any means, but the bosses are much less difficult than the arcade version. In the arcade, the bosses are super unforgiving, and I had trouble getting by without using continues. In the NES version though, most of the bosses have an easy AI to abuse, and you can spam the same move over and over again and walk away without a scratch. The boss on the snow level is a good example of this. You can back him into a corner and he can't do anything. This is pretty pathetic. But not all of the bosses are pushovers. I still had a hard time against General Trug, and even the samurai boss from the new stage was challenging. Speaking of which, I didn't talk about this yet, they added 2 brand new stages that were not in the arcade version. So I do think it's pretty cool that they tried to add more content, almost as a way to compensate for the limitations. It's almost like a director's cut. So remember how in the first game the turtles were so unbalanced because Donatello was so good but the others were not? Well, this game is the exact opposite. You can perform a special move by hitting jump and attack at the same time, just like the arcade version. It's a powerful move, but all other turtles have the exact same power output, and there's really no difference between the turtles except for appearance. For an example, Donatello doesn't have better range or anything like that. Really, there's too much balance here. Would have been nice if there was some differences between the turtles. One thing they really got right is the music. The arcade version already sounded good. Take a listen. So you would think the NES version would have been butchered, but it arguably sounds better than the original, in my opinion. But I'm also a sucker for 8-bit renditions. So I talked about how easy the bosses are, but the other enemies like the foot soldiers and so on are just as difficult to get around as the arcade. I had a lot of trouble with the snowman from the ice level, or rather, Frosty the Hitman. That's clever. So difficulty-wise, it's really only the bosses that were affected. Otherwise, it really does play and feel like the arcade game. The graphics are acceptable for NES standards, but they're still noticeably worse than the arcade. Of all the color choices, they went with gray, just a lot of gray in most of the levels. I know there's limitations, but it's hard not to comment on it. Overall, I do think this is a more than acceptable port of the arcade version. Konami really tried to keep as many of the elements the same as they could. In fact, in some places like the conveyor belt and the Technodrome, they tried to emulate something that the NES just couldn't do. In my opinion, they tried too hard to replicate every scene from the arcade version, rather than just embracing the limitations of the NES. Maybe Konami could have come up with something better if they just focused on what the NES could do well. But all that said, this is still a great game and I highly recommend it. Despite the Super Nintendo already being out, Konami decided to make another Ninja Turtles sequel for the NES. It would retain the beat-em-up style gameplay that the second one had, but what's interesting about this game is that this isn't based off an arcade game. This is a completely original title for the NES. Wow, that actually kind of intrigues me a little bit. Let's check this out. So the official title is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhatten Project. You remember the Manhatten Project in American history, right? You know, Shredder kidnaps April, turns Manhattan into a floating island. It sounds about right. So I already see a lot of improvements here. The graphics are very colorful, far less gray than the other game. The turtles even have differences in their special moves too, so now it actually matters which turtle you select. In this one, Raphael seems like the best character because his special move comes out fast and it's easy to use. Weird that he went from being the worst character to the best. So this game plays similar to its predecessor, but there's a few differences. You can perform this new move where you throw enemies over your head, and it's an instant kill against the foot soldiers. You have that aforementioned special move as well, but unlike the other game, the special moves are a lot more effective, but they take a little bit of life every time you use it. Now that sounds awful, but here's the good part. When you're on your last bar of health, you can spam the special move and still hang on to your life. So once you're almost dead, it's time to bust out the special move. In fact, I spent most of my playthrough at 1 health. Unfortunately, this was fixed in Turtles in Time. In that game, you can't go for your special move anymore when your health is too low. So because this game is an NES original, Konami was able to perform more tricks that manipulated the NES hardware. For an example, in Stage 4, there's a subway train that makes a stop in front of you. The train looks like a separate background layer, but really this whole area I have highlighted is on the same background playfield, it's just sliding to the left. In the Technodrome level, there happens to be another conveyor belt, but look, this one moves so much smoother. A lot more fun too. This uses a similar trick to the train. I think it's really cool that they did tricks like this. Since this wasn't based off a different game, I feel like Konami had more freedom to do what they actually wanted. There was no pressure to emulate a game that was made for better hardware. The first couple bosses are pretty easy, but the others are not pushovers like the other game. When I made it to Leatherhead, I started to realize I'm actually in some trouble here. Some levels even have sub-bosses, so it's a little bit of an endurance round. One change that I actually like, when you lose a life, you can actually switch to a different turtle if you want. I'm surprised they don't let you switch per stage or on the fly like in the first game, but this is still a nice feature. In the arcade port, once you select your turtle on the character select screen, you're stuck with them the whole game, even if you use a continue. Not that it matters, they're all the same anyway. So in this game, it's a nice addition. The graphics, like I said before, are fantastic. They really nailed it with this one, so much color all around. I prefer the status bar being at the bottom too, rather than the top like they did with the other game. I also like the silly logo with all the turtles photobombing at the bottom. In the other game it was just the TMNT logo, which was fine, but this is a nice little improvement. The turtle sprite is also much improved from the first TMNT game, but one random nitpick though. Am I the only one that thinks it looks like he has a frowning face or something? Look at that. Is he depressed? Bow! I also need to comment on the intro at the beginning. It actually resembles the intro from the arcade version, which is really cool. I didn't comment on this before, but the arcade remake didn't have the intro, so better late than never, I suppose. The music sounds great too, but this should come at no surprise. Honestly, all three games sound great, but they especially got this one right. Take a listen. I also like the sound effect when you make contact with the boss. So overall, this is an improvement over the other game in nearly every way. Being able to switch characters in between lives, that's a pretty nice feature. I like that the turtles actually have gameplay differences between them. This feels more like a game that was specifically made for the NES rather than just a copycat port. So comparing all three games together, the Manhatten project definitely gets my vote over the arcade port. But here's the big question, which one is actually the best Ninja Turtles game? These are two completely different games. The first Ninja Turtles game was unique because a lot of TMNT games tended to be beat-em-ups, and this one was not. And the third game was released late in the NES's cycle, and by then, Konami had enough practice to really polish and perfect their games. In my opinion, being a big fan of Turtles in Time, I had a blast with the Manhatten project. It played so close to it, and I remember being so frustrated over the first one, so I really have to vote for the Manhatten project overall. On March 10th of this year, a new TMNT beat-em-up game was announced. The trailer mostly features a cartoon segment, but it also shows some gameplay footage as well. The cartoon is well done. The turtles are drawn like they are in the original show, not like in the 2003 series or the Nickelodeon version. So it's clear they're trying to lure in some of their older audiences, and honestly, I think that's pretty cool. The cartoon starts right above the Manhattan skyline, just like in the show and the arcade game. You see some familiar characters, even Splinter and April are fighting off some of the foot soldiers. So we only get about 10 seconds worth of gameplay footage, but there are some comments to be made. For an example, I love the character models of the turtles. They look fantastic. I love that their running animations are actually different. They could have copied and pasted the same sprites for each turtle, but they went the extra mile, and honestly, I think that's really awesome. The stages look great too. This particular one resembles the parking lot stage from the arcade, or maybe the alleyway. And we can see a stage here that sort of maybe resembles the Technodrome, and we see another stage that resembles the news station that April works at. So we know the game is going to be released on PC and consoles. We don't know what consoles yet though, hopefully the Switch. In the gameplay footage we can tell this is going to be 4 players. Honestly, playing this with friends would be a lot of fun. There's no mention on when this is going to be released or the price. If they want a game like this to work, the turtles should all have different abilities just like in the Manhatten project and Turtles in Time. But Dotemu has proven they are capable of taking well-established IPs and making great games out of them. They already did this with Streets of Rage 4. So I do think it's really cool that they're making a new beat-em-up like this, and I do plan on picking this one up. I do wonder what Dotemu is going to do with this title though. This could be just a $4 download that has 4 levels on it, or maybe it will be a physical release and it will get a full-fledged game. I'm sure we'll find out in the next coming months, but either way I'm excited. Yo, thanks so much for watching this video, guys. I owe a thank you to a few people. Special thanks goes to the Extra Lives World 1-1 blog, Marty Beckerman from MTV News for his article on product placement in TMNT, Spriter's Resource for a few of the NES sprites I used in this video, Retro Mags for some magazine snippets, and Jenny Zhang from GameSpot for the original announcement for this game. So I'm very sorry about how long this video took to make. I'm about a week late on this one. I got a little carried away with the reviews for these games. I thought I was only going to cover a few minutes per game, but it ended up being my longest video yet. I just had a lot to say about the games. I try as hard as I can to make these videos the best quality possible, so if you enjoyed this video, leave a like rating, and drop a subscription if you haven't already. With that said, thanks so much guys, have a good day.